If you want a game to show off your new PC and what it can do, I mean, a game that you could just easily confuse with a pre-rendered movie. I'm swinging the camera around right now. This is live. This is not a cutscene. This is not pre-rendered. This is the game. Well, this game really shows off what Unreal Engine 5 can do. It is absolutely incredibly impressive. It's also letterboxed by design, and you can't really solve that problem without going to mods unless the games update things, and I have a feeling some people will find that divisive. I mean, it doesn't actually bother me personally, but I imagine for a lot of people. I think it would be nice if they put in the menu the option to remove the letterboxing for ultra-wide, but that is not there. So basically, this is what you get. Now, what are we doing right now? We're running this game absolutely maxed out on an RTX 4090. Frame rates are kind of in the mid-40s in this scene. By the way, if you don't have your own kind of frame rate counter, I will show a cool thing in the graphics menu. If I press the start menu for the preview here, not only does it show you what you're doing as you're changing graphics settings, but if you change individual settings, like for example, if I wanted to switch to DLSS and see what that looked like, and if I want to go to preview, notice that it gives you a cool little frame rate counter here on the right-hand side of the screen. It shows you your frame rates as FPS as well as frame times, how much VRAM it's using. This is really cool stuff. So you could compare like DLSS. Notice it does say it has FSR 3 upscaling here. And when I switch between these, I would say that, this looks a little more shimmery, less temporally stable as we're over on that one. We have XeSS upscaling as well. So some pretty cool options here. If I go back to TSR at 100%, we're at the game's basically maxed out settings. Scrolling through the options menu here as well, they do offer dynamic resolution scaling, which is a cool touch, at least when you're using TSR. And the game does have some HDR support, and then quality settings have global settings of high, medium, and low, although you can open up the advanced menu and have a little more control over that. I think some people will want a little bit more control over like turning off some post-processing because, well, I think the post-processing looks awesome. I know some people feel like this is a bit too much on the like chromatic aberration and film grain and all of that. I know people have preferences on that. So again, I think it'd be cool if we had a little more control. But if we go ahead and kind of set the frame rate counter right now, this is the opening scene of the game, and you can see that the RTX 4090 is hitting in the mid-40s, and you'll also see a few little spikes on the frame time graph. So this being Unreal Engine, it can be prone to the occasional frame time spike, which is unfortunate. And I don't think it's just shader compilation because I've been through this area before. So I think it's more of the Unreal Engine kind of traversal stutter type of situation. Anyway, you can see we're getting in the kind of the mid-40s in this area. I've played later areas of the game that do run better, closer to 60 FPS on the 4090, but I thought I'd show one of the more demanding areas, and it is the opening scene of the game. If we go ahead and kick on DLSS to the quality setting, things still look quite good. And we can go ahead and measure that our frame rates now. I think this also kicked on frame generation. Let me go back and turn that off real quick. So frame generation off, it does offer frame generation. So just DLSS quality upscaling without frame generation. You can see that we are here in the kind of the mid 70s now. If I pan the camera quickly, it kind of drops into the lower 70s. And that's the frame rates that we can hit with DLSS quality at 4K Ultra. This is how I was actually playing the game on my high-end system. We will look at some lower-end systems. But again, we do have frame generation available if you did want to use that. And that can, again, boost motion fluidity on a high refresh rate display. Keep in mind, again, it doesn't improve responsiveness, although this game really does not require lightning fast response times or anything like that, at least as far as I've been in the game. There's a lot of walking and some occasional combat. Anyway, if you played the first game, I think you'd have a pretty good idea of what to expect. Now, I did notice that while it has FSR 3 upscaling, I did not notice FSR 3 frame generation. So the frame generation for FSR 3 does not seem to be available, which I think is unfortunate. It would be nice if they had that added in. We also have XeSS upscaling available as well, which is nice to see. Now, let's talk about the scalability of turning down settings rather than rendering resolution. So if we scroll through the settings menu, there's some global presets. You can also dive into the advanced settings one by one. And let's take a look at what kind of scalability we have when going between the high settings and the low settings and medium settings. So I'm gonna go to this preview that they have, which is nice. And we can now watch the frame rates change. So in this scene, at high settings, we're hitting 50 FPS at this frozen image. And then we can go down to medium, and you can notice that frame rates jump up to about 73. And we can go down to low, and you can see that frame rates jump all the way up to 84. So you can see that there is actually a lot of scalability here. Again, low's at 84, medium is hitting 73, and high is hitting 50. So there's actually a good amount of scalability in those settings. I think you guys would agree that low settings, once everything's loaded in and all that, right? We've seen the transition. The low settings actually still look pretty good. So if I go down to low settings, this is full native 4K resolution at low settings. I mean, I would argue this still looks way better than most games out there, even at low. So if you do have to turn things down, I don't think you should feel like you're getting a terrible looking experience. And that's one thing I think people need to understand with looking at scalability in games like this, is what are we actually getting from low frames? Again, this is not a pre-rendered scene. Like, I can actually pan the camera a little bit myself. You kind of control if she's walking up and things like that. So there's a lot of impressive graphics happening here. And again, this is actually running at low settings currently. Again, we could switch over to medium, and then, you know, again, things still look quite good. And we're now running, yeah, kind of in the 60s to 70 range at the medium settings. But again, this is an RTX 4090. So I think we should switch over to some hardware that's more like what you might have in your computer. Maybe we'll start with an RTX 3060, because that's a pretty common GPU, as well as one that a lot of people might know how theirs compares against. And we'll see how many GPUs I have time to test out before my kids get home from school. All right, now we're on an RTX 3060, and our frame rates are hitting 20 frames per second. And I think this should be set to maximum settings, but at 1440p resolution, which is a lot to ask of an RTX 3060. So yeah, we are on the full native 1440p resolution with no upscaling, and everything is set to high. So obviously that's a bit much to ask for. However, I am curious if we go ahead and go with DLSS quality, what that'll get us. Because I've noticed Unreal Engine 5 is extremely resolution dependent. So if we do that, we go from 20 to 35. And again, this is one of the more demanding areas I've seen so far in the game. It still looks quite good with DLSS quality. And okay, we're at 30 frames per second. That's not great, but that is how the consoles run the game. So and this is a really slow-paced game, as you can see. So I think some people who just want to experience the maximum visual fidelity in this game, you got a 1440p screen, you've got an RTX 3060, you could go ahead and try to play it maxed out with DLSS quality, and just kind of frame rate cap to 30 frames per second and play it on a controller, and things are pretty slow paced, and maybe have a reasonable time. But what if we wanted to do better than that? Well, unfortunately, like I said, I don't think we have FSR3 frame generation, so we can't do frame generation on 30 series GPUs, and this would be a bit low of a frame rate to go for on that anyway. But remember, we said that the graphic settings are quite scalable. So what if we go to low settings and keep on DLSS quality, and just go ahead and see where we're at now. So low settings with DLSS quality will reset the frame rate counter. And actually here, in a fairly demanding area of the game, we are over 60 frames per second. And again, the low settings in this game still look pretty incredible, if you ask me, right? I mean, I don't think anybody's gonna say that these graphics look absolutely terrible or anything like that. And the DLSS quality upscaling looks pretty good. So 1440p, low settings, DLSS quality does get you a 60-ish frames per second experience in this fairly demanding area of the game with all this water and everything. So the other thing I'd want to look at on the 3060 is what if we went down to 1080p? And what if we wanted to play at native resolution? And what if we wanted to play at high settings? How are we gonna do? So if you got a 3060 at 1080p, can you max out the game? Well, you'd be at around 30 frames per second. So and possibly dips below. So again, if you want to max out the game and just enjoy the visual fidelity, you've got a 1080p display. That is certainly one option, but again, most PC gamers are probably going to shoot for a higher frame rate target, even in this style of a game. So again, if we go with adjusting settings rather than upscaling at 1080p, we could go down to medium settings, and you can see that we're now in the mid-40s. I would argue that the mid-40s is a high enough frame rate for a game like this, considering a lot of it's just walking around looking at things. But again, if you don't agree, we could go down to low settings, which still, like I said, do still look quite good. And we're still not quite hitting 60 FPS. So 1080p native resolution is just not going to be a 60 frames per second experience on an RTX 3060. But upscaling could probably get us there. One option would be to let TSR do some dynamic resolution scaling to maybe a 60 FPS target. And we could see how that plays out. And you can see if I reset the frame rate counter that we are now scaling to over 60 FPS. So then if you VSync lock to like a 60 FPS display or something like that, or hit a 60 FPS frame rate cap, I think you'd get a pretty good experience this way, and then it would only be scaling as much as needed to hit that 60 FPS target, so in easier areas you might be at a full native resolution. And then the other way we could go here is using DLSS quality. Again, this DLSS does not seem to have a dynamic scaler option. So in this case, we would be now up into the 80s, but again, we're on the low setting. So if you're gonna upscale at 1080p, you could probably go ahead and claw back a little more visual quality. You're losing some sharpness to the upscaling, but maybe we could go all the way to high settings. Let's go ahead and see how we do there. Well, high settings aren't gonna be 60 FPS with DLSS quality, but they are certainly, like I said, probably playable on this for this style of a game. And then we could also go down to maybe the medium settings if we did want to make sure we're actually playing over 60 FPS. I have a feeling this should get us there. And we are. So we're over 60 FPS. So we've seen a variety of ways we could play at 1440p or 1080p on the RTX 3060. And I think the game is absolutely playable on all of them. And again, I do want to mention that other areas of the game can be easier than this. So like if I jump to the Shore of Slaves area, rather than the landfall area, you can see that here we're actually getting over 80 frames per second at these settings. So if we could actually maybe even kill the upscaling, let's go back to TSR at 100% with no, let's turn the dynamic scaling off. So here we're at native 1080p resolution, and we're hitting close to 60 native, and I think that was medium settings, correct? And here, if we went down to low settings, then we would be well over 60 frames per second, even at the native 1080p. So again, that opening scene of the game is more demanding than some other areas of the game, and I did want to show that. Notice the frame time spike we just got here as we loaded into this new area. So there are definitely some traversal stutters, like I mentioned with Unreal Engine. I think we should try out at least one AMD graphics card before we're done here. I went ahead and kicked in the 6800 XT from AMD for one reason, just to give a different kind of performance class of GPU. And the other reason being this is the recommended AMD GPU for playing this game at 1440p high settings according to the system requirements. And I speculated that they probably didn't mean 60 FPS when they said that, and that seems to be kind of confirming that here. So we're currently at 1440p native resolution. Again, no upscaling, and we are at the high preset. And in this demanding area of the game, we could walk forward a little bit, as you do a lot in this game, just push forward. Anyway, we're at kind of the low 40 FPS range. So again, it's not 30 FPS, but it's also not 60. It's kind of in between, which is kind of what I suspected the system requirements were when I did that video. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't do things to improve them. Although again, in this style of a game, 40 FPS is, I think, actually quite playable if you do want to just keep the entire visual treat going. But if we did want to play with things a little bit, let's try out a couple of options. One option would of course be to scale down the graphic settings a bit. If we go down to medium settings, it looks like we are now actually at kind of that 60 FPS line. And again, things are still looking quite impressive at medium settings. So one option, medium settings at 1440p and 60 FPS in this demanding area. Other ways we could do things, though, would be involving upscaling. So if we go back to the high settings and instead we could do TSR and try to dynamic scale to 60. I'm not sure how aggressively it will scale. Let's go ahead and take a look. And it looks like it's getting the job done. Now, we definitely in motion lose some clarity due to the upscale. But again, things don't look terrible or anything, and TSR is a good quality upscaler, and it's nice to see it has the dynamic setting available, unlike the other upscaling methods. So that means that when you're in the easier to run scenes of the game, you don't have to use as much upscaling. You get more internal resolution when the load on the GPU is lower. So that's kind of nice to see. Let's go ahead and maybe take a look at some other things. So another thing to maybe look at here would be, what if we wanted to use FSR quality upscaling? So if we just want to lock into FSR quality, again, there's no frame generation here, even though it's calling it FSR 3. It's just the upscaler. Here, we're now, again, kind of over the 60 FPS line. So decent performance there. Although I think going with the TSR Dynamic might be my choice if you're going with the upscaling route. I do also want to look at some other rendering resolutions. So this is a pretty strong card for 1080p, but it's also getting to be a little bit older now, not super old or anything, but high settings 1080p in a game like this, it is still over 60 FPS at these settings. Sounds like my kids are getting home. I can hear the door opening and some footsteps upstairs, so we will wrap this up pretty quick. But yeah, it looks like it can max it out at 60 FPS at 1080p. And then what if we were kind of in an easier area of the game, or what if we want to use Intel upscaling, something like that? Maybe let's look at XeSS at quality settings, something like that, in case you wanted that upscaler to try out. Here we go. Again, sounds like my kids get home, so I was going to test out a little bit more on this GPU, but I think we'll end it here for today. My final thoughts are that the game, again, looks incredible. It's an amazing showcase of the Unreal Engine 5. I wish they would give an option to not use the letterboxed widescreen aspect ratio, maybe just have a warning in the menu that the intended experience is the letterboxed ultra wide, but then allow users to override that if they, pass through the warning screen or something like that. And then again, I think, like I said, also, I think being able to adjust more of the post-processing effects manually, because unless I'm missing it, it doesn't seem like we have that ability. Also didn't get a chance to look into variable rate shading here much or anything, but overall, I would say, yeah, game looks incredible. A little bit of Unreal Engine 5 stutters, a few other options would be nice to have, but it looks like you can play with the settings to get this thing playable on a variety of GPUs, and the gameplay doesn't really require high frame rates anyway, and this is a cool one to show off your PC. I think it's also available on Game Pass Day 1, so that might be another way you could experience it. I think it's a pretty short game, so you could probably run through it easily in a month of Game Pass or something like that. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section, maybe how it's running on your system, because it's always good to get that info out there, and I hope all of you have a better day than Senua is over here.